Before we begin today, I want to take a moment to thank you for supporting the work of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Simply by being here or watching the recording, as the case may be, you are supporting this work. Our mission is to invite you to experience the power of myth. That is our North Star. So thank you for being here and thank you for engaging with these ideas. My name is Joanna Gardner, and I'm the managing director of the Campbell Foundation. It just so happens that I am also a mythologist, so I am deeply committed to the practice of engaging with mythic metaphors. Personally and professionally, I have seen firsthand how mythic images can clarify confusing situations or offer encouragement through difficult times and even inspire creativity. As a mythologist, I follow Joseph Campbell in taking myth seriously, but not literally. I take myth seriously, but not literally. That means paying attention to mythic metaphors and archetypes and the metaphorical meanings they suggest, having to do with psychology, with spirituality, with society, and with the nature of the world around us. And that's exactly what we'll do today together for the next hour. As I said, our mission at the Campbell Foundation is to invite you to experience the power of myth. And in 2025, we focused on the power of myth at the movies. Movies are an extremely mythic medium, and we've zeroed in on different archetypes at the movies, one each month. We are just beginning December's focus on the archetype of the magical child, which we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. But it has been a joy and an honor to lift up so many archetypes over this last year. So thank you again for your support of this work, and most of all, for your willingness to engage with these ideas in your own life. And with that, Jason, could we bring up slide 2? So just to give you an idea of how the next hour will go, we'll start out by talking about some archetypes at the movies, the teacher, the prophet, and the magical child. After that, we'll segue into a conversation about the Joseph Campbell book, Myth and Meaning, and that will be by my colleagues Bradley Olson and Steven Garinger. And then we'll close with Q&A and some announcements from the foundation and a promo code. So hang in for the promo code at the end there. Jason, let's go to the next slide. I want to quickly introduce the members of the Campbell Foundation team who are here on the webinar today. These are the mythologists who you'll see over the course of the next hour. We have Jason Batt doing our IT wizardry today, myself, Joanna Gardner, I've already introduced myself. We also have Steven Garinger, who edited the book Myth and Meaning, which you'll hear much more about. We have Bradley Olson, who is our Director of Publications, who will be interviewing Steven about the work he did on Myth and Meaning. And we have Stephanie Zachowski, who is our Operations Director, who will be helping out with the chat and Q&A and all kinds of work around the edges of the event today. So with that, let's start with a chat check-in. I would love to invite you to open up the chat if you have not done so already, and let us know where you're joining from. And I'm very curious, which of our archetypes today is uppermost in your mind? Are you thinking more about the teacher or the prophet, or the magical child, or some completely different archetype? Who is the archetype who's present for you today? For me, I think it's the magical child. You know, it's the month of December, and we intentionally chose the archetype of the magical child for the month of December. That sense of wonder, which we'll talk about more in just a second. But Steph, I would love to come to you and hear what's going on in the chat. Do we have any other archetypes joining us in the space today?
Oh my goodness, the chat has all kinds of
Oh, good,
look
good.
at the day. Just yes, hello everybody. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. We have folks from all over the world here with us. Netherlands, the UK, the Ukraine, New York, Florida, all over. And yeah, we're getting, I would say, I wish we had a poll going right now for magical child, prophet. There's a little bit of all of them, but I do see some magical child is very much of interest. The teacher, these are all just great archetypes to work with. So, yes, thank you all
Awesome.
for being here. Thank you for your responses.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steph. And so welcome to all the archetypes. Welcome to you for joining us. Welcome to the archetype or archetypes who are joining with you. And with all that energy in the space, I would say let's begin. Let's begin talking about archetypes. So the first archetype we'll talk about today is the teacher, and I'll go through a couple of slides about each archetype, and we'll talk a little bit about what the archetypes' powers are, what the archetypes' pitfalls are, and how they have appeared in the myth blast that we've been writing. So with the teacher, some of the powers of the teacher archetype, or powers and possibilities, include things like knowledge and wisdom, encouragement, the ability to encourage others, to encourage students, right? Empowerment, giving power to a student, compassion for students, right? These are some of the strengths that the teacher archetype has access to. And as with all archetypes, there are pitfalls as well. We call them pitfalls and perils with the teacher archetype. And these are things kind of to watch out for when this archetype visits. The teacher archetype, if taken too far, can have a sense of rigidity, right? Or a sense of a know-it-all kind of mentality, can be kind of locked in old ways and might even hold the student back from trying new things. A sense of being overly strict. Sometimes the teacher archetype might feel left behind by students who surpass what they have done. And with the teacher archetype as well, there's a danger of overwork, like overpouring into the work of teaching, and then the burnout that follows from that. So that gives you just a sense of like the strengths to call on with the teacher archetype and the things to watch out for. And we have a quote for each of these archetypes from the book Myth and Meaning as well, which is our featured book today. And you'll hear much more about the book in a minute, but I just want to share this quote about the teacher energy from Myth and Meaning. And these are Joseph Campbell's words. Campbell writes, "My problem is to communicate my scholarship to a public, and my public are my students and their like. I've worked hard. I wouldn't say as an artist, but as a craftsman." And so Campbell's talking about, Campbell was a teacher for decades. I counted it up once. I feel like it was 38 years or something that he was a teacher for. And so he lived the teacher archetype. And I feel like that comes through in basically everything he writes. But he's kind of speaking directly to his experience with the teacher archetype in this passage. So let's go on to the next slide. Jason read my mind. So these are just some of the Myth Blast essays that the foundation has published about the teacher. These were all published in the month of October. And so we had a Myth Blast by Priyanka Gupta about the movie The Karate Kid. We had a myth blast by Leila Panjetta about Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Scott Neumeister wrote a myth blast about the movie School of Rock. And Steven Garinger, who you'll hear from more in just a minute, wrote a myth blast about the miracle worker. And so I think this gives you a sense of the breadth of all the different, well, not all, but many of the different kinds of ways that the teacher archetype can appear and express in completely unique ways, right? Same archetype, very different expressions here. And so would love to invite you, if you're thinking of a movie that has the teacher archetype in it, would love to invite you to put that in the chat and share with the community, other films that offer different versions of the teacher archetype. For me, the first one I always think of is Dead Poets Society, and Robin Williams playing the character of that beautiful English teacher in that movie. I saw that years ago, and it was very formative for me. Steph, do we have any other teacher movies coming into the chat?
We sure do. Yeah, Dead Poet Society was one of the first ones in
Oh,
there.
okay.
Stand and Deliver, Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars.
Mm,
Yeah, The Mandalorian, uh, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, Goodwill Hunting,
mm,
uh, Ultima, The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, lots of great movies in here. I always love this movie list that we
right?
with these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the teacher and the mentor have a lot of similarities as archetypes go. So yeah, it's interesting. Thank you everyone for sharing those movies in the chat. I really appreciate that. It reminds me again just the incredible diversity of expression that archetypes that can take on, and that kind of nods to the power of the archetypes. That energy can come through in so many different guises, right? So let's go on to our next archetype of the day. Our next archetype is the prophet. And this is the archetype that we focused on in the month of November at the foundation. And so the prophet archetype, again, has many powers and possibilities that are available for drawing on. The prophet has obviously foresight, knowledge of the future, right? Also a sense of farsightedness, not just telling the future, but like seeing implications of current situations and potential actions, a sense of insight. The prophet can see things others can't. And notice the emphasis on the vision, seeing, like, and the image kind of captures that with the eye, right? The prophet is it's the metaphor of seeing is very, very present for them. Also, visions, again, seeing and revelation, like making something clear that might not be known to others, might not be available to others. So those are some of the powers of the prophet, and the prophet has pitfalls as well. Some of the pitfalls and perils of the prophet archetype include not being believed, like Cassandra, right? Many prophets share a message and are not believed. They can be rejected, they can be ridiculed, they can be exiled. They can feel loneliness and despair, maybe in their exile, in their rejection. They can also be subject to overconfidence and maybe some inflation, maybe over certainty that they are completely right, and maybe they aren't, right? And so a quote from Myth and Meaning, again, these are Joseph Campbell's words. And Campbell writes, all mythic images are rendered by what are called seers or prophets, that insight, right? Today, we would call them artists. And this is kind of a theme in Campbell's work, this connecting the mythic insight, mythic imagery with artist and art. I'll continue. The artist is one who's opened the eye of vision and sees past the phenomenal forms to the principles that animate them, and then renders them to us. So that would suggest if you are a creative person, and I believe you are, that's just my personal belief, but the work of creativity a lot of times has similarity with the work of prophecy, with seeing a vision, with having an insight, and then bringing that out and making it accessible to other people who didn't experience the same insight that you did, right? And I just think that's such a generous act when artists, prophets, seers, whatever label you want to use, when people share their visions and make that experience available vicariously to the rest of us. So let's go on and look at the myth blasts that the foundation published about the prophet archetype. It just so happens that November was a month with five Sundays rather, which means we had five myth blasts for that month. And some of the movies that these myth blasts talked about, the first one was the movie was called Arrival. And that myth blast was by Kishan Kodai. And then R.A. Noble wrote a myth blast about two movies, The Master and One Battle After Another. Teddy Hamstra wrote about the movie The Zone of Interest. Scott Neumeister wrote about The Hunt for Red October, which is a movie I adore still to this day. And Monica Martinez wrote about The Matrix, which again, I love that movie. So these myth blasts are all available on our website, and I believe Steph is going to put the links to these myth blasts in the chat. I highly encourage you to take a look at them. These are all brand new essays. They're all freely available, and they're all written by people who are actively engaging with the work of myth today. So just a little bit of plug for checking out these myth blasts. And also want to invite you to open up the chat again if there are other movies that have the prophet archetype that come to mind for you. Um, I mean, for me, these I feel like these movies are really amazing. I kind of keyed in on The Hunt for Red October and that myth blast by our colleague Scott Neumeister. Scott is works here at the foundation as well. But Steph would love to hear if there are other movies with the prophet archetype that are coming up.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. We've got Dune. Yeah, Dune. The Green Mile. It's another great one. It's a Wonderful Life. Well, that's definitely appropriate for the season. Blade Runner 2049. Yeah. Thunderheart, Razor's Edge, um, Watership Down, The Messiah, The Theory of Everything. Yeah. Um,
Wonderful, wonderful.
yeah.
And again, just the diversity of how this energy can appear and the potency it carries, the power that it carries, right? Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing those movies. Yeah, it always gets me thinking. So I will rein that in for now, and we will go on to our next archetype. Our third archetype of the day is the magical child, who we've already introduced a little bit, but here early in the month of December, this is the month for the magical child, and so some of the powers and possibilities that the magical child brings include wonder, that sense of awe and joy and wonder, renewal, the new life coming forth, right? Joy, love, celebration, magic, being childlike, right? And a sense of otherworldliness, that sense of a being who has recently come from a place beyond, perhaps, right? And so, again, like with all archetypes, there are things to watch out for. The pitfalls and perils of the magical child include immaturity, right? Childishness, naivete, maybe a sense of escapism or arrested development, an unsettling sense, a loss of touch with reality, even some isolation, perhaps. And so, again, these are attributes to be conscious of when working with archetypes. What powers are available and what are the things to watch out for? And so we have a quote from Myth and Meaning for the magical child as well. Campbell writes, the first universal existential reality is that of the mystery of birth, right? That mystery that brings the magical child into the world. That's more than a biological phenomenon, believe me. The mystery of a new being coming in. And that really, I think, tees up that sense of wonder that the magical child can bring, that sense of new life and new possibility and so much potential. And so we don't yet, because we have not yet published any myth blasts for the magical child. I don't have any links to share for myth blast for the magical child, but I will share that Stephanie has a myth blast coming out tomorrow about the film The Never Ending Story and the Magical Child. So I'm very excited to read that. I hope you are as well. If you are on our newsletter list, if you subscribe to the Myth Blast newsletter, you'll get the link to that Myth Blast tomorrow when you receive the newsletter. So I highly encourage you to check that out, and would love to hear if there are any other movies that you're thinking of with the magical child. I think of The Matrix again, and that scene when Neo visits the Oracle and there's all those children in the white in the white outfits doing magic in the waiting room of the oracle. That to me, that's a scene with magical child energy. And so Steph, author of the upcoming Myth Blast, would love to hear if there are other magical child movies coming into the chat.
Well, what jumps out immediately is E.T. Yay for the movies of the 80s. Like they really captured that magical child, didn't they? Yeah. The Avatar, Matilda, The Golden Compass. I'm sorry, it's like jumping here. The Sixth Sense, that was brought up last time too, but that's a really, yeah, that's a magical child one too. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. The Fisher King, um, 2001. I would say, yeah, the list goes on. But yeah, Peter Pan, that's definitely one.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this one, so what's coming up for me with talking about the magical child is also the sense of fun, right? Like this is a fun energy. So yeah, so I hope that this energy is present for you this month especially, and you know you can experience the archetype with maybe a little bit more awareness this month. And so that's kind of it for our overview of the archetypes. At this point, would love to kind of transition into talking about myth and meaning, which we've been alluding to this book a little bit, and I've shared some quotes from it with each of the archetypes. But really want to highlight this book. This is the newest volume in the collected works of Joseph Campbell. That's an official series name, right? The collected works of Joseph Campbell, and it's just Campbell's books that the foundation publishes, right? And this is the most recent volume in that book. And it's a really special one because it is so accessible. It is so conversational. It's kind of written in a question and answer format. And Campbell is answering questions in a very conversational voice. It was compiled and edited by my colleague, Steven Garinger, who you'll meet in just a moment. And Steven kind of painstakingly went through many little known recordings and transcripts of Q&A sessions and compiled that material into just a beautifully accessible collection here. It includes previously unpublished material on topics from, you know, the basics of myth to the relationships between myth and religion, myth and psychology, myth and art. You can get the ebook at on the JCF site, jcf.org/shop. But you know, I like paper books myself, and you can get the paper book wherever books are sold. And I will say, you know, if you're looking for gifts for anyone who might have any kind of interest in the field of mythology, it's a great starter book when for someone who's just starting out. I mean, I enjoyed it as, you know, I wasn't just starting out, but really just want to underscore how great it would be for people just beginning to enter into this work. And so, with that, I would love to invite my colleagues Bradley Olson and Steven Garinger to the virtual floor. Brad, our director of publications, is going to interview Steven, who edited Myth and Meaning, and they're going to really kind of talk about this book. So Brad and Steven, take it away.
Thanks, Joanna. It's lovely to be here this morning with everybody. It's morning where I am anyway, and so good to see you. And I get the chance to talk with the redoubtable Steven Garinger, and one of my favorite people to chat with. And I think you'll come away from this little conversation with that same impression. Um, Stephen, as Joanna said, is the editor of Myth and Meaning. I think it's a remarkable volume, not just because it gathers decades of Campbell's spoken reflections, but because, Stephen, you shaped these fragments into something like a portrait of Joseph Campbell, kind of a sharp psychological portrait. And your editing shows us Campbell as a scholar who's still thinking, who's still teaching, who's still engaging the world and its complexities. And so I'm so appreciative, and I'm very grateful for the work that you've created here, and I think Campbell would approve heartily. So before we get more properly into myth and meaning, you've worked a long time on this project, and I'm wondering if you can describe for us how living with a project for so long changed you. And did it
Oh,
change your relationship to Campbell himself, not just his work?
oh,
Can
very
you
much so.
speak to those things?
Very much so. The project was first proposed to me by Bob Walter, the previous executive director of the foundation for a few decades, in December of 2003. And we published the book in November of 2022, a glacial pace. Um, And there's a reason for that. It's assembled from 44 different sources, articles, transcripts of radio interviews that aired just once, and then no one ever heard it again, and a lot of audio of little known interviews. And then also question and answer sessions after lectures. So I had a massive amount of material to work with. In terms of how it changed me, it humanized Campbell in many ways, and it clarified so much of Joseph Campbell's thoughts for me, which I hope it does for other people too. Because part of the idea behind it was that there are two types of Campbell's works that have been published in my mind. I call them written Campbell and spoken Campbell. Written Campbell, we know it's Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Mask of God, works that are rich and elaborate and replete with footnotes and references, often very scholarly. But there's also what I call spoken Campbell. And spoken Campbell, the Power of Myth companion volume to the Power of Myth interviews comes to mind for that, or Myths to Live By, which was Joe's edit of lectures he gave at the Cooper Union over a period of about 14 years in the late 50s into the early 60s. And then most of the books that have been published since Campbell passed, a lot of them have been compiled from lectures that he gave, which are different chapters of the books and are edited that way. So spoken Campbell reaches a lot of people that written Campbell doesn't, because the conversational tone comes across, the human being, his wit, his charm. And you can't help but be affected by that, whether you're hearing him speak it or you're reading it on the page. His humor and his delight in the subject comes through. And that's contagious for me. Um, it's difficult, though, to weld all those together, all the different sources, because a lot of the interviews, Joseph Campbell starts with, say, the four functions of myth. And so we didn't just want to publish, you know, 30 different articles, all that have the four functions of myth in them. And in fact, sometimes, he's talking about the four functions of myth to one person. Studs Terkel comes to mind, is interviewing him in a radio interview, and he'll ask something, and Joe will start getting off on the four functions of myth in a brilliant opening. But then they get off in the weeds because Studs Terkel will interrupt, ask a different question. So Joe never finishes that part of the conversation, but I could find a different, an ending that really complemented that in another article or another interview. And so there was a lot of welding that together. But how to do that, how to organize the material was the tricky part. Uh, Basically, I think we all have in our mind questions that we would like to ask Joe if he were here with us now, that aren't covered in his published works, in the books. And this to me was an opportunity to do that, because a lot of that material comes up in these interviews. And again, some of them, like there was one interview that I used a transcript of it that only About 20 minutes of it appeared in a magazine article, but it was a 2.5 hour interview. And what's more, the interviewer left the tape running as Joe and Jean invited him to have a cocktail in their apartment after they'd finished the interview. And little interesting nuggets came out there too. Joe, at one point in one of the chapters, points out, I'm not a Jungian, I'm a Schopenhauerian. And, that's a little nugget I picked up from there. But welding them together focused on the questions. And the questions, the original interview questions, sometimes they worked, and a lot of the time they didn't. Joe would be on a book tour. Yeah, and some reporter in a newspaper doing a quick article, somewhere in the Midwest who doesn't know myth from math, asked Joe a generic question, and he would pivot to answer the question that should have been asked. So sometimes the questions were suggested by the material that I used. A lot of the times the questions came from people in the public. For a number of years, in the late 90s into the early 2000s, I was one of the people moderating the Joseph Campbell mythology group on Yahoo. I was involved as one of the moderators and admins of our conversations of higher order for a long time on the original Joseph Campbell Foundation site. And we had something like 86,000 different posts there. And also, we had a Facebook group at one time. So a lot of people would ask questions, things that they wish they could ask Joe that they'd never get an answer to. So I drew a lot on those. What are people interested in? And then I went hunting for the answers to that. And then sometimes the questions were just suggested by the material, or a bridge, but essentially it's taking all of these nuggets from Campbell's interviews and from these question and answer sessions and stringing them together, uh, beating them onto the string of questions. Or in my mind, I think of it really as a mosaic. And the more I worked with it, the more I realized that Campbell was the same as the rest of us. Yes, he was a scholar, but the material delighted him. And he was also very human. His humanity came through, in that. So it did change my relationship to Campbell's work. It amplified my understanding. I felt it was like, getting a postgraduate degree in Joseph Campbell's thought. Um, so I hope that answers your question. I could go on for 20 more minutes on the process there, but I won't.
No, no, that's marvelous. And I loved your distinction between written Campbell and spoken Campbell because, you know, doing the things I do for the foundation, I have lots of opportunity to listen to old audio of Campbell too. And there is such a distinct difference. And you're absolutely right in the way that you describe that difference. And I was wondering if you've had the experience as you listen to all of this of Campbell, through the years, through his own development. What do you notice changes about him, or what becomes more uh, uh, calcified, um, I mean, one example I'm thinking of is the four functions of myth, right? That in spoken Campbell changes in the way that he describes it, and sometimes even additional functions.
Very much so. The four functions of myth we first really come across partway through The Mask of God. So in the 60s is when he really starts discussing those. Yeah, and puts his thought together about that. There are, I don't want to go too deep in there, but there's the metaphysical or mystical function, of the universe, as a whole, this incredible mystery that we have. There's the cosmological function, how do we picture that to allow that mystery to come through? There's the sociological function, which is, how it's used in society to govern society. Ten Commandments come to mind, from Judeo-Christian mythology, or the caste system in India, mythology kind of determining the shape of the culture, and what the rules are that are laid down by God or the universe or whatever. And then the psychological or pedagogical function, which are, the stages of life that we all go through. And early on, I'd say Campbell realized that the sociological function and the cosmological function really, we're untethered from that today, because the cosmology we use, especially in a Judeo-Christian culture, which has been the dominant prevailing religion in the West for such a long time, is at odds with the science, with the cosmology that we understand at the moment. And we don't really have the sociological function anymore. Laws aren't handed down by God, they're provided by the legislature or the government or the society through consensus and so on. But the mystical function and the pedagogical or psychological function, the stages of life we all go through, have stayed the same. He's also, at different points, has brought up, a couple other functions. One that comes to mind is the editing function. I believe it was the Trobriand Islanders. They believe that a child who is born is, yes, you have the mother and father, but the father isn't really directly related to the child. They believe the child is related to the mother and the mother's brother, the uncle. So they see resemblances, physical resemblances, and mannerisms between a child and its uncle on his mother's side, but not between dad, between the wife's husband. And it's just this editing that happens because of the mythological structure that they're using. But that wasn't necessarily universal. Another was the magical function. Myth, you want the crops to grow, or you want to cast a spell on somebody, and so on. But those, fell by the wayside for Campbell, because these were far more enduring for him. One of the areas in which I think he changed the most is his understanding of women in mythology, and the role of women in mythology. Originally, this would come up at Sarah Lawrence and so on. His idea, the male perspective, which was kind of the default setting of our society at the time. Well, woman is the goal of the hero's journey. The woman isn't the hero who goes out on the journey. His students, among others, educated him differently. They wanted to be the hero, and he realized they do have, a hero's journey that they're going on. And so you find over time that his view changes on that. And that was one of the things where I didn't represent the entire evolution of his thought in the book, but pivoted towards, what his understanding was the last several years of his life. When he would be asked, the hero's journey, what is the hero's journey for women? He would say, I don't know. I know there is one, but I can't tell you, the specifics of how that plays out. Well, who can tell us? Joe would say, women. They're the ones who are experiencing the journey, and have a better understanding of it than I do. And that was a big change for him. Other changes I noticed over time, some he had difficulty with. Uh, like the word, well, Neanderthal man is a good example. At one point, he's, way back in the 60s into the 70s, he's like, what are we going to call him? Neanderthal person. Yeah, because he wasn't able to recognize that, well, Neanderthal worked perfectly fine. Uh, pardon me. So little things like that. Another is the word primitive versus primal. Uh, eventually friends of his within the Native American community communicated to him how painful it was for them to hear themselves referred to as primitive. And he, eventually realized, oh, it had a different meaning for someone who's being called primitive than for him when he was approaching it in his mind from a scholarly perspective. So he did eventually try to change his use of language there. And some of those are very superficial. His view of television was interesting too. When television first appeared on the scene, first of all, he and Gene did not have a television until just before the moon landing. They finally bought one, a small little black and white set, because they didn't really have time to watch television. It was like going to the movies, something they rarely did. If they were going out for the evening, they would go to the theater, or, you know, Gene was a dancer, choreographer, so they would do a lot of work, with other artists and so on. And there wasn't really time in his mind for frivolous stuff. And he would talk about every so often being called by one of those dialing for dollars things of, what's your favorite television show? And, well, I don't watch television. The response would be, well, how do you spend your time? But when television came in, it started affecting how he taught at Sarah Lawrence. Because at Sarah Lawrence, it was an avant-garde women's college. They didn't get grades. They had, Campbell would lecture, but then he would have a meeting every 2 weeks, with each student in his office where they would go over that student's particular program. What was it that fascinated them that they wanted to learn about in the field of myths? So some might be studying ancient Egyptian mythology. Some people might want to understand something about Carl Jung, or, and all sorts of areas that students would go off on their own little interest, which created a lot of work for Campbell because he, a lot of this he was aware of and knew already, but sometimes he had to read on the subject and study it to stay ahead of his students. So he was engaged in a conversation with them, really. But he noted once television came in, that all changed. And instead of 40 students pursuing 40 different projects, suddenly they all wanted to do the same thing, the same 2 or 3 or 4 different subjects, whatever was popular and being discussed about on television at the time, which made his job a lot easier. So, on the one hand, at the beginning, it sounds like, okay, he thinks of this as a little bit negatively, but later he also pointed out that it's an opportunity. Artists will emerge on television. It won't just be entertainment, but we will see art. Same thing as in the theater, same thing as in the movies. That artists will engage, this new medium. And that pretty much is what happened today. In some ways, we're in the golden age of television. We still have lots of formula stuff happening. But just saying that he was aware, even though he wasn't really tuned in to that area of popular culture, he could see how it affected his students. And he was confident that creativity would win the day eventually.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I mean, we could go on forever. I mean, Campbell had such an extraordinary life, and his openness to the modern world, is remarkable. He was born in 1904. He saw one of the Wright brothers fly over Manhattan in an exhibition, and then witnessed the moon landing on top of it. And he always remained open to development. And I mean, we could go on forever, but I know we have some constraints with time. And so I just want to thank you for, helping us imagine Campbell anew. Uh, Myth and Meaning reminds us that myth isn't just a relic, but it's uh, a living entity, and one we must keep learning and relearning. Your work let Campbell be what he always was, a teacher a cultural commentator, and probably most of all, I think a champion of creative imagination. So I think I speak for all of us when I say I'm grateful for the care and clarity you've brought to his voice and for the way you help keep that voice alive. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you, Stephen. And I want to particularly call out how Stephen highlighted Campbell's changing views. And what that brought up for me, Stephen, is how the archetype of the teacher also needs to be able to learn, right? There's no teaching without learning and staying open to changing your mind, right? Which is what learning is all about. I also appreciate that you pointed out how much the material delighted Campbell, right? Like I think I speak for pretty much all mythologists. We get into this field because we like it, right? I've said it before. I don't know anyone whose parents made them take the myth program or study myth. Like we choose this because we find some kind of delight in it. So thank you for calling that out. And in that way, I think we follow Campbell. I think his delight is continually contagious in his work. And so hoping that effect happens through this book. So would love to invite Jason and Stephanie to come on camera as well. We have a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question for anyone on the team, and know that this whole team is mythologists, right? Everyone that you're seeing on your screen right now is a mythologist focusing on maybe slightly different aspects of myth, but we're a team of professionals and mythologists both. So let's open up for Q&A. If you have a question, click that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type your question in there, and then we'll be able to find it. And I think we have a couple questions in here. So I'll start with this one. Nathaniel asks, the threefold topic of teacher, prophet, and magical child seems interrelated, like maiden, mother, crone, tripartite, right? Is this designed intentionally? If so, could you explain the inspiration behind it? And so I'll begin answering by saying we chose the archetypes for each month intentionally, but we did not choose those three as a group. So it's super interesting, Nathaniel, that you're sensing the interrelation of those three archetypes, and would love to just kind of like toss this out to the team a little bit. Steph, I want to check in with Steph and Jason on this sense of the interrelated archetypes. So Steph, let's start with you and then to Jason, just to like some reflections on how these three archetypes are playing together.
Well, I think it's an interesting call out as well. I mean, the archetypes are always interacting, and I find that particularly fascinating. I mean, you think like the warrior and the lover, and when they're having conversations, I think is when some of that tension actually brings about new ideas and interesting things to explore. I think I like that call out with the prophet and the child, the teacher and the child. I think there's overlap, and I think there's distinctions, and I think all of those are pathways to follow. Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. Jason.
I think because the archetypes, one, come immediately out of the interior life, they aren't as defined as often when we put them on paper or we talk about them here. The world inside is much more like water, and these are very amorphous type zones, and they bleed into each other. A character can literally portray and embody multiple archetypes. An individual can morph. Now, that may struggle. I lean always back to Star Wars. I think one of the most interesting things that happened was in the latest series of sequel films, Luke Skywalker went from being hero and morphed into teacher and mentor. And that caused issues. People could not see him as that. But at the same time, that was a very natural role that the hero would later become the one who would guide them. So these borders are very blurry in the actual archetypal realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes one moment, one archetype is called for, and the next moment, another archetype is called for, right? So yeah, thank you. Thank you for those reflections. And I know we're running short on time, but I do want to bring in at least one more question. And Brad, I'd love to bring this one to you. Stasia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but it's a very simple question and a very profound one. What's the definition of archetype? So Brad, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, sometimes I think archetypes are really nothing more than these common experiences we all have of our lives. And archetypes are a sort of nomenclature. And so we have, the experience itself. And so we talk about the senex or the teacher or that sort of thing. For me, and those of you who follow Pathways with Joseph Campbell, you've heard me address this before, that what's important to me is not so much the archetype, but the archetypal. And as Jason said, that these archetypes never manifest in isolation. And so the archetypes are a kind of nomenclature. It's the archetypal that's the experience of life. And because there's this interconnectedness to these archetypes, this associational quality, that archetypes kind of are formed the way, uh, you know, Google gives us an answer. It's this associational thing. And that's what gives life its depth. That quality of this overlap and this bleeding into one another and things like that, it takes us deeper and deeper and deeper into our experience of life. And that's where we end up contemplating uh, uh, the whole, as Zorba the Greek said, the whole catastrophe, right? The life itself with all of its, you know, joy and sorrow and tragedy and success and all of those things. And we may start with an archetype, but that's where we end up if we follow the movement of the archetype.
Thank you. Yeah, so nomenclature, archetypes provide a nomenclature. And I heard you say for the experience of experience, right? Like I love those thoughts. Thank you so much. Thank you to the whole team. Would love everyone open up that chat. Let's hear it for this team of amazing mythologists and all the work that they do. And if you have any if there's any new ideas or insights or thoughts that you'll carry away from this time today, would love to invite you to put that in the chat as well. I'm a big believer in sharing insights when they arise. If you have an insight and you share it, we all get to experience that insight. So I want to invite you to type in anything that's coming up for you from thinking about these archetypes, from thinking about myth and meaning, Campbell's life, anything at all. And I do have some announcements to share. So, Jason, if we could bring up the slides, there's some exciting announcements that we're able to share today. The first one is that our YouTube channel, as of yesterday morning, has the full video of the film The Hero's Journey. This is a biographical portrait of Joseph Campbell. It was filmed shortly before his death in 1987, and it kind of talks about Campbell's quest. You know, Campbell wrote a lot about heroes and quests and things like this, and this film kind of lets Campbell be the hero of his own journey. I think Steph will drop the link in the chat. It's completely free. I encourage you to go take a look and follow us on YouTube. Follow at Joseph Campbell Foundation, and you'll get all the videos as they become available. And yeah, we're just really happy to be able to make this available to you and to anyone who you feel so called to share it with. Jason, let's go to the next slide. And you might have, if you've been, receiving our newsletters or following us on social, you might have heard about these new books, this new series of books. The series is called the Joseph Campbell Essentials, and they are absolutely gorgeous. We are so excited about these books. They're little, like pocket-sized, really great gift books, right? I mean, I selfishly enjoy it myself, but it's also a good gift. And what each of these books has is just like a curated list, in effect, a curated selection of kind of Joseph Campbell's most pithy quotes on these topics, on bliss. You know, he's obviously famous for the phrase "follow your bliss," and on the hero's journey. They're just beautiful. Let me see if I can, like, here's a page with an illustration on it. We're just so excited about these books. They're great to gift to yourself, great to gift to other people, and so you know you can get them wherever paper books are sold. Bookstores, I'm sure, have them, and all the online retailers as well. And that leads me to our promo code for these books. New World Library is the publisher of these books, and New World Library is offering a promo code right now of Myth Gifts. That's the code. So write that down or take a screenshot. And what you'll get 35% off both of these titles, either or both of these titles, when you buy them at the New World Library website. This code doesn't work on Amazon. It doesn't work on bookshop.org. It doesn't work at Barnes & Noble. It only works at newworldlibrary.com, and it's good for a week. So if you're in the market for these books, this is a great way to get a really good price on them. And so let's go on to our next slide. There is more to come. So our thank you gift for donors for this year's gratitude campaign, we call it, is the ebook version of On Bliss. And all it takes is a donation of $10 or more on our site, jcf.org, and you'll get a free ebook of On Bliss. And this is good. This offer is good until December 31st, through the end of the month. And again, I just want to reiterate my gratitude and the gratitude of the entire organization for your presence here and for whatever support of this work feels called to you. And so with that, next slide. So this announcement is a little more in depth. We're, as an organization, the Joseph Campbell Foundation is embarking on a new project to digitize some footage of Joseph Campbell that has never been seen before. We have, in our archives, we have over 20 hours of recordings, but it's on really old film formats that you can't just, like, you know, pull up and play on YouTube, right? It has to be digitized, has to be cleaned up, has to be digitized, it has to be edited, the audio and video have to be synced. It's a really, really painstaking and time-consuming, and I'll say expensive process. But we're really excited about this project. This footage, we don't know what's there. We'll be discovering it as we digitize and as we restore. But, you know, it could have all kinds of applications, from educational offerings to new publications, perhaps, to even film projects. Who knows? And so if you're interested in supporting this effort through donations or through grants or through sponsorships or anything like that, you can email us at this address at the end of the slide here, donate@jcf.org. It's, like I say, it's going to be a long-term project. It's really time intensive. And yeah, support for this work would be amazing. And so with that, next announcement, Jason, if we could go to the next slide, I want to give you a sneak preview of what's coming. Actually, Jason, can we go back 1 second? Yeah, there we go. So we're wrapping up our year of experiencing the power of myth at the movies, and we're getting ready for 2026. And our theme in 2026 is going to be experience the power of myth in music. So we'll be focusing on music all year long. We'll be writing myth blasts about myth and music, and offering classes and other activities. We'll do more webinars in 2026. So make sure you're on our mailing list if you aren't already. And you can subscribe to our mailing list at jcf.org/subscribe. And I think Steph can put that link into the chat. And follow us on social media as well. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and we're on YouTube. We're so excited about the power of myth in music. It's going to be super fun. And in the meantime, we wish you an absolutely magical holiday season. And we're so excited to see you in 2026. So have a great day, have a great month, and yeah, please follow us and sign up for the newsletter so that we can keep you posted on all the events and activities and myth blasts that we'll be working on in the new year. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.